Thank you very much. Our second speaker is Professor Charles Wessner, Director of Technology, Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the National Academies in Washington, D.C. He will address the key question of how Greece can build an innovation-based economy that promotes sustained growth and development. In this context, he will discuss on how to form research-focused and well-funded partnerships that encourage entrepreneurship, and he will focus specifically on 21st century universities that can drive regional growth and inspire new ideas for innovative startups. So, Professor Wessner.
Thank you very much. It's a great... These instructions are in Greek.
Okay, so left click, you move forward. Left click, here.
Yeah, okay. So the red one.
Yes.
I've always been taught never touch the red button. So. I'm from the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, and as you heard, I work on innovation policy and entrepreneurship, and that's because we're trying to figure out how to do that. Almost every country in the world, with the possible exception of North Korea, is trying to figure out how to do that. And by the way, if at any time you think what I'm saying is funny, it's probably because I'm trying hard to be funny. This is desirable because it keeps us from crying. And at the same time, I think it's very important to remember that when we're talking about these questions, it's a common effort. And I wanted to emphasize the point of reference is important. I come to Europe about once a month, and I've never known who actually is competing hard to get to the European average. You know, I'm not quite sure what a European average brings you. And for those of you who think that your main competitor is Sweden, I would like to point out that there's something called Asia. Only too often you talk to people, particularly in France, and they're talking about how to beat the Americans across the Atlantic. And that hot breath on their back is from the Chinese, Singapore, and Korean dragon. I was very heartened by the previous speaker's references to small countries. Small countries can do this really well. There's no inherent limitation. And I think it's also important to note that it's the fact that you have a strong research base is a great place to begin from. Hopefully that will not hinder you too much, because the countries like Korea and Singapore and Taiwan that have grown fantastically didn't do it by first becoming good in basic research. I'm from the Academy of Sciences. Don't tell anyone I said this, but you know, think about that. This is not how they did it. They took existing innovations and they built them better. And they used lots of precepts that we all recommend. The first thing they did is pay no attention to free trade. And we're very careful to keep their frontiers blocked, to beg, borrow, or steal the technology as required. I could go on, but that would be wrong thought. So we just need to, it's sort of like the way the Italians play soccer. It's not usually to be recommended to everyone. Another point I'd like to raise is that we want to get up to that 3% target. Well, if you're at 2.5 already and you're Germany, then you can probably push that up to 3%, and indeed should. But if you're at 0.5, that becomes much more problematic. And moreover, it begs the whole question. You know, the 3% target, as I understand, came up in Barcelona when guys had too much wine to drink one night and were trying to figure out what to do. No one ever figured it out. Most countries literally can't or shouldn't do that. The question is, what do you do with the research dollars you have? How can you spend them more effectively? That's a harder question, but it's the real question. Trust me, my country spends a lot of money, about $150 billion a year on research, and ask any researcher in the United States if that's enough. And guess what the answer is? No, not at all. You also have to be careful about the problem of duplicative research. I asked a professor, a distinguished professor in the academies, what was duplicative research. He said, oh, that's fairly simple. What I do is first quality, what that other guy does is duplicative. Okay? Any questions? And duplicative is often the research that gets the answer, whereas the other research didn't get the answer. All we need to do is figure out which team is going to get the answer, and then it'll be very simple. But no one, trust me, has been able to figure out which team will get it. And innovations often come from quite unforeseen places. You know, the human genome mapping came, we spend $30 billion a year at NIH, so naturally it was the Department of Energy that figured out how to do that. Did we anticipate that? No. So having made that little speech and hopefully offended a great number of you, we will now go on to a couple of the challenges. I think we've come to conclusions here that there is an innovation challenge and it's important. What I'm pleased to see here today, and I think we're indebted to Professor Kritikos for setting this up, is the focus on growth. And a number of countries around the world are focused on strength, not consumer satisfaction. You should think about that. Sustained support for universities, but intelligent support, funding for research we've talked about, and small businesses. The innovation strengths I think you have, we've already talked about, so let me go through that quickly. The plan is perhaps fragmented, and I've heard several people talk about getting an integrated plan for Greece. The United States is, despite what the guys having champagne at the World Economic Forum may think one particular day, the United States is broadly recognized as one of the most innovative countries in the world. Have any of you seen our innovation plan? Well, neither have I. We've been looking for one for a long time, but we actually don't have one. I was told once by a group of German parliamentarians, literally when I said that they said, "We're sure you have one, you just won't show it to us." They said, "Surely your Ministry of Science has a plan." And I said, when we get the Ministry of Science, I bet we'll get a plan. But actually, we don't have a Ministry of Science. Everybody likes to refer to the National Science Foundation because they're almost our smallest R&D agency. In the US, we do applied research. $75 billion goes to defense. Some of that involves very basic research, but most doesn't. NIH, $30 billion, a global good, does applied research. Sometimes basic, but broadly applied by definition. These are mission agencies. So you guys want to put more money into basic research. The Koreans will thank you. So, how do you get more entrepreneurial-friendly policies? Well, this is some of the things you need to do. I heard earlier the challenge of opening markets. It's very hard to have competition and new firms if they can't get in the market. Provide early-stage financing. The minister mentioned that remains a problem. We talked briefly about easing firm creation and exit. Remember I asked you what is the appropriate referent group? For a conference organized by our German colleagues, it's not surprising that there are frequent references to Germany. But when I spoke to the CDU Science Committee in the Reichstag, one of the things that they announced very proudly was that they had reformed the bankruptcy laws. It used to be 12 years that you couldn't practice if you went bankrupt, and they knocked it down to 8. 8. So what I proposed is that's great. Why don't we apply the same rules to people running for the Bundestag? If they lose, they can't apply again for 8 years. No one took that up. I couldn't understand why. It's actually a grievous problem in Germany. It's also worth keeping in mind that the Germans have venture capital, and they have a rapidly growing area of startup activity around Berlin, which is relatively recent, so there's grounds for the way things can shift suddenly. But they have about 0.02 of their GDP in venture funds. They're behind startup nations like the Netherlands and the UK and France and Sweden. The US is 0.17 versus 0.02. So if you're going to look at how to do venture funding, or if you're going to look how to do startup funding, Germany like the United States, has lessons to look at for the rest of the world. I'm told that I only have 5 minutes left, which is too bad because, as I've told Professor Kritikos, when you fly from the United States, we feel that we should have 1 minute of speaking time for every hour of travel time. So let me skip up through a talk that I hope you'll find interesting at some point if you get to read it. There's a problem in getting funding. We call this the Valley of Death. I hope some of you are familiar with that because it applies across the world. And the proposed solution for the Valley of Death is supposed to be venture capital. And let me tell you, it's a little bit like the Cinderella stories. Sometimes that magic happens. But actually, venture capital is declining in size, and it's very fashion-oriented. There tends to be a herding tendency. 1 year it's all nano, the next year it's all bio, the next year it's all solar. So it changes all the time, but it can be very hard for firms to get funding if they're not on the right cusp. It's also smaller than you think. It's been falling. Why has it been falling? Anyone know? They're not making money. That detail, once again, they're not making money. They're losing money. So I'm very happy to see here in Europe that they decided if the private sector thinks it's too risky, then the public sector should do it. Okay, that's right. You don't have those same experienced entrepreneurs. You don't have those same strong technologists, but surely they could do it. And it's a great plan, by the way. I really love the public venture funds because first you get the public money, then you give it to a private organization. So if it works, the private people get the money, the public people, well, and then you give it to a bank. And then the bank takes a cut, right? And then they give it to another fund, and they take a fee too because they've got this money. And then they give it to another fund, and they take a fee. You begin to understand how this works? Plus, it's venture money, so you don't know for 5 to 10 years. No wonder people want to be venture capitalists. This is great. You get paid year after year, and no one can tell what you're doing. So you have to be careful with that. And my point here on this venture capital oversell is that there's a great deal of money that is lost. Some of it isn't lost, but it's called what the venture guys call the living dead. And that is to say the company's there, but there's no opportunity for a liquidity event. You can't sell it. We're the land of venture capital, right? So where does the money come from for startups? Look at the chart. Venture capital's down here just behind bank loans. So venture capital, and this is a very serious point, the venture capital story is an obsession in Europe. Do you need venture capital? Yes. Is it a great advantage, a huge advantage in the United States? Yes. But the problem you have is deal flow. You create the deals, the venture guys will find you. We were taught that venture capitalists invest within a day's drive until there were deals in China, and then it was a day's flight. Okay? So they will go where the deals are. Your trick is for you to set up deals. So how can you do that? Well, I'm from the United States, the land of crazed capitalists, right? So we put in 3 times more than what the venture capitalists do with public funds, not an equity investment, grants and research contracts, okay? $3 billion a year. Now, I don't have time to talk about this, but one point I would want to make, do you know how we get the money back? There's no recoupment, ever. It's a grant or a research contract. Why? Because our entrepreneurs are not really interested in having the government sitting up in the front seat helping them drive the car. And as one scientist said, oh, if you're going to take the money back if my project fails, if my project succeeds, I can tell you in advance it's going to fail. And when you're dealing with physicists, it gets pretty hard for the accountants and the lawyers to figure out what works and what doesn't work. So the best practice features are, it's focused on the Valley of Death. It's that first money, the hardest money to get. It's a competitive program. Oh, I was told years ago in Greece, we couldn't do this because everybody has an uncle. Right. Okay, corruption is a problem. One of the most profound things that Dr. Kritikos pointed out is that if you change the regs, you eliminate, you don't have to wave applause, it's okay. If you get rid of the regulatory junk, then the opportunities to extract rents, to get money for that, go away. That's why there's resistance. But you can do that. You get a cleaner board, you reduce the opportunities for corruption. But for an SBR award, or for that matter for research awards, we have something called the internet. You internationalize the process. And by the way, not just in Europe. You can draw on Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, you can draw on the diaspora, and if they can't do the proposal in English, that's telling you something. One of the things that you need to be sure you have with these investments is scale. I was talking to some people in the Czech government who want to do an SBR program, but they thought they would do a pilot program first. You know, that reminds me of the young girl who goes home, the young married woman who goes home and tells her mother in tears that she's not going to have any children, and she says, "Why, dear, what's wrong?" You know, and she says, "Well, we tried once and it didn't work." Well, you can't run a pilot program with high-risk investments and make two to see if it works. It's like going to a basketball and taking one shot and deciding whether or not you're going to win. It just doesn't work. You need a portfolio effect. You need to keep trying. Let me go to the next topic. Sorry, I will be there shortly. One of the points I'd like to make here that's very important is the enhancement of competition. You can use this on procurement. So in sum, as a way of breaking through the oligopoly of suppliers that almost every country in the world has, like we have with our Defense Department. That's one of the reasons we use SBR. So in sum, this is a phased program. It uses private matches in its later stages. It requires no new money. You can take the percentage that is required to fund the program off the existing procurement budget of the Greek government. Did you hear that magic phrase? No new money. And you generate competition, you generate new companies, you generate more entrepreneurship. And by the way, the EU likes it, so you have permission. What else can you do? That's the challenge I'd like to leave you with on SBIR. What else can you do? If you know of a better approach to encouraging entrepreneurship, competition, new products, would you please let us know? Because we'll adopt it. The whole world is looking to find new ways of doing this. And let me just close. If you want a 21st century university, that is one that can teach the next generation, conduct research, commercialize, and generate market-ready students, then you need to change incentives. You need to give responsibility and authority. You need to change the status of professors and make it more permissive. And if I could point out, the Vice Chancellor for Commercialization, the title's important, the Vice Chancellor for Commercialization at Carnegie Mellon University. I once asked her, well, what do you do about the conflicts of interest with the professors if they have a company and they're teaching? She said, well, you know, we never really know what the professors do anyhow. And if they teach their courses and occasionally publish, whatever else they do is really okay, don't you think? And the point is, they're very hard to police, aren't they? How many of you are professors in this group? Oh dear, yes. I think you'd agree with that. You're a hard group to police. I didn't hear the question. Good. Yes.
That's consistent with your question, right?
That was the thrust of the question. Did you hear that? How many of you also have companies? That needs to grow, but that's not bad. That's not bad at all. We'll try and stamp that out one way or another. But thank you. I think that's an excellent point. So my last, and I'm going to close on this, take heart, sir. I always am fond of John Kenneth Galbraith's great quote where he said that about halfway through your talk you should say in conclusion, just to give your audience hope. So, so there are grounds for hope here. But the bottom point there in red is that this is not a hobby, working on innovation for Greece. This is not something to do when you finish up everything else. It has to be central to the national economic recovery. Indeed, I would argue that the only way forward to a national economic recovery is to learn from, adopt, and adapt to Greek circumstances the best practices from other. That requires a global view. You need to collaborate, change the incentives. One of the things I don't think we should say again in the rest of the day is should. Saying this should happen. The question is, how do we make it happen? How do we make people want to do what needs to be done? And one solution, by the way, just in closing, may be to do parallel research institutes with different rules where the professors who want to change can self-select. Because in our experience in the United States, reforming a university is a little bit like World War I. There's a lot of blood and no progress. So finding a way to step aside that is really important. And lastly, as you said in your own words, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. You have an opportunity here to do what you need to do. And what I was pleased to hear from our chairman is that the rest of the world is interested and willing to help. Thank you very much for your attention.